empathy for each other, you could say. So, what about the present context in which many of us do not feel a sense of as in we do not feel attached to the geographical locality in which we are present in. Rather, we are more empathetic towards beings of similar interest to us, and this has been facilitated greatly through the means of the internet. Because through the internet, you can reach people with similar interests to yourself in different geographical localities. So, how do we interpret these models of cities in our present context? That's my first question. And as for my second question, right. So you mentioned that the two forms of distraction and intellect translate themselves into distance and privacy. Now, this is not so much as a question, but more of a comment. But could it be that the reason why this translates itself to privacy is because we see that the polis, that the metropolis, doesn't really have a character and identity of its own. It's like it's like how you put it. We are cogs in a machine. So the metropolises do not have characters of their own, and that is why we adopt the mode of privacy to sort of isolate ourselves from being subsumed into that whole identityless environment, because we want to preserve our own identities. That is more of a comment that I wanted to make, and and also that's pretty much about it. Thank you.
What shall we do? Go around with the questions, or answer each question as they come?
Maybe first we answer to these.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Okay, what is common between Sparta and Athens in belonging to a common city, to a polis, and why we have lost this sense of community, some sense of belonging to a city as motherland or fatherland. First of all, I think the parenthood, so to the fact that the city was born from a unity of families, different families who belong to a common genus. So Greece people had this feeling to belong to a common genus. We can say to a race, a common race. Race can sound not so good, but in a certain way, ancient Greek people were racist in order to feel themselves superior to barbarians. But this fact was grounded not on blood or color of skin, but to the fact that they speak a common language, they have common values, they produce beauty, harmony, and a style of life which was perceived as the best way of life, freedom. So the sensation of being free, and the polis, the city, has guarantee of this freedom. On the contrast, the Persian monarchy was perceived as a Greek monarchy in which only one person is free, the king, Darius or Xerxes, and other people are only submitted to the only one person who is free. On the contrary, Athens, for instance, all citizens are free, and this freedom is guaranteed by the city, by the fact that they belong to a common city as common space of freedom and changing and interchanging common values, common good, we can say. And then all values which we define classics were born there in that period in Athens. Literature, poetry, art, sculpture, picture, historiography, philosophy, tragedy, comedy. It was a miraculous event of the history, but we as son of Europe and Western civilization are son of that moment. That moment which was born as Greek, but then it globalized itself in this first globalization. In a certain way, in the globalization, many of those values were lost. But in another way, many of those values were done or donated to the former barbarians. So we can say, and that's a paradox and a contradiction. In a certain way, a tragedy of the history. A tragedy of the history.
Thank you. I would like to start with a reflection about the internet. You spoke about internet. Internet seems to create a real global community. With the internet, you are connected all over the world. But if we study internet in its real performance, we note that with internet we are always alone as individual atoms in front of our PC, personal computer, and we exist only as a virtual community, not real community. You stay always alone. It's a false community, a community of individualities connected just by the web. So you are alone in front of your PC and you use credit card in front of your PC. So the ideal of the consumer alone as an atom and with the relation, with the commodificated relation to the rest of the world as a lonely atom. The second reflection that I would like to make is about Simmel and the preservation of private identity. Of course, there is also this component that you said, but for Simmel, that is not the fundamental one. For Simmel, in the big city life, you cannot create true relations immediately because you have so many experiences, you meet so many people every day that it's real impossible to be real in relation with the others. In fact, says Simmel, that in the big city life you can, yes, you can create real and true relations, but this operation takes much more time than in the provincial town life. This is the point. It's not just a question of privacy and identity. It's a sociological question that you cannot, in the big city life, immediately create through relation. The effect of the distance, distraction, has its own consequence also in the intersubject relation with the others. And this is, I think, a real important point to understand in our today life, our relations in the big city, as I've tried to say in my discussion.
Any other question? Anyone else?
Can I ask another?
Yeah.
Okay. So, in light of what you've said, firstly, I would like to ask, how is it possible to create an environment where we can all be collaborative and empathetic to each other, in light of the fact that we are no longer attached to our geographical roots? That's my first question. And my second question is that, so Zeman is saying that is a realization that we cannot make close relationships in a city that causes us to be atomized, in a sense. So how can we change that? As in, in a sense, what is the purpose of a city essentially? Because these days it seems that the purpose of a metropolis is really just to drive productivity. There's no other goals. So how can we bring back individuality into society, into our present world, without losing so much of the technological progress that we have made, or are the two sort of antithetical to each other?
The thing that you are asking, right? How can we keep the city, and the city in which our individuality is not crushed but is enhanced, right? How can we avoid that the city becomes just a means of productivity? Have I understood your question correctly? Yeah. So, I personally think that, first of all, the fact that we pose this question is very important, because we live in an era in which too often we run to the conclusion whereby we say things are the way they are, there is nothing to do about them, so suck it. Okay? This is the first mystification. It isn't true. Things are not the way they are because they're not always been this way. So they can be in a different way. The way they've been in a different way, they can be again in a different way. Keeping this in mind allows me to jump to a possible answer to your question, an attempt at an answer. And it is the following. I said before about history, the fact that, one tendency of modern metropolis, of the globalized metropolis, or one tendency of metropolization, is the flattening up of history in two ways, either by sheer destruction. You go see what has been done in China and keeps being done in many places in China. That's what you have, sheer destruction, right? Or, which is the same, touristification. So you go to Florence not to reflect on the kind of reality that Florence has represented when it was there as a true city. You go to Florence because it's a Disney World built in the style of Italian Renaissance. Right? Instead of Mickey Mouse, you have Lorenzo Magnifico, but it's pretty much the same. It's another kind of annihilation of the past. Why is the past important? As I said before, the past is not a museum. It's not an ensemble of garbage that we carry around because we have it on our shoulders because, our ancestors couldn't stay quiet and they had to build it, right? The past is a basket of possibilities that have been there and that, as such, show you that the world has been different from what it is and hence can be different from what it is. I said before I didn't want to go into this but very telegraphically, this is the concept of what Heidegger called Wiederholung, the repetition. You look at the past as the depository of possibilities that have been there, that is, ways of being in the world that have been there. And again, you don't do this in a sterile way. In order for you to do this, you must engage with reality. Now, one particularity of commodification, and in the internet this is particularly true, is that we live in a way that, in a way, prevents us to engage with things. Zimmel said it, the fact that we enjoy only the instant is one example of this, but the case of the internet is also true. While you are, and I've seen this with people I like, with people who are my friends, while you worry about the destiny of the Indians of Amazonia that have problems with, I don't know, capitalists there in Amazonia, you forget about the destiny of the poor guy here at the COPTM who doesn't have enough money to go by day. What has happened there? A disconnection, whereby you donate your money to the Indians of the Amazonia, but in the meanwhile, you don't do nothing to change the reality here in Singapore. This disconnection does not allow you to engage with things. And engaging with things necessarily means that you must engage with things that are here, not things that are the other end of the world. Because here is your proximity of reach. Here's where you can actually change things, even just by talking to people. Okay? And with this, I conclude and I give you.
Okay. I will try to give an answer to your questions, but also to your suggestions. To the two questions that you made, I would like to say this. How to react to all this? What to make, as Lenin said, what to do, as Lenin said. I think that we couldn't find an answer in Zimmer's text. He was just a sociologist, and he wanted just to study the real society. But the philosophers must also change the world. As Marx said, they must think about the alternative. The first thing to do, and I agree with Paolo, is to think the reality as possibility, not as a Greek fate that never could be changed. We must think the reality as possibility, as history and possibility, with the philosophy of the idealism that I study. Reality is possibility, is not a fate. The first thing to change reality is to think that reality could be changed. This is the real thing. To discover again the community in the globalized metropolis, we must give space to the real communities that survive in the metropolis. For instance, the school, for instance, the groups of friends, of religion, of human communities in which not only the commodificated relations exist, but also other relations based on other values. This could be the starting point to change the reality, to react against this. I agree with Paolo when he speaks about the Wiederholung with Heidegger's words. But I would also say that our time is the time of the eternal present. Eternal present. We live in a special time where there's no future and there's no past. Only the present survives. The present that wants to become the future and wants also to become the past. So what you said about the tyranny of the present, also Marc Auger speaks about this issue. So it's very important, this point, to understand what you said about the particular construction of the today cities, where they try to remove the past, and impose all and always the same present, This is very important, I think.
May I pose a question to you? Are you an engineer or an architect?
Neither.
Nor, well, okay.
He's a philosopher.
Philosopher.
No, it's
Okay,
part of the
because
goal.
I was thinking that for an architect, it's easier to create something new, something beautiful, something useful, looking at the past, in the memory of the past, in the memory of what former civilization left to us. On the contrary, a mere engineer reproduce in a calculating way buildings, houses, but without this look backward to the past, to the beauty of the past, see history of art, history of culture, but as a possibility to create or recreate something new and something beautiful and perhaps more comfortable for human life in day-by-day life. So I think that the beauty of the city is something we need in order to live in a happy or really human way of life.
Or the Eusin.
Yes, Eusin.
Any other question?
I have a comment.
Yes, Karen,
Oh,
just a second. I give you the microphone.
For Professor
Me?
Girgenti.
Girgenti, you mentioned the free concept. I don't think that's really free for Athens, because you can say that they are free, but it's all within, as long as within a law. So I would feel the people who are truly free are still the people with power. So everybody else, like the three classes that you mentioned, the people who are truly free are just the first class.
So you are not sure that Greek people were really free,
The Athenians.
the
Yeah,
Athenians,
the Athenians.
but they consider their freedom in relation with belonging to the polis. So polis is the guarantee of freedom. So they were men citizens. So their essence as human beings coincided with the essence of the city-state. But a city-state not ruled by a tyrant, but a participation of all citizens to the laws of the city in this way. But a small city, not a big city.
Yeah, I feel, from what I'm getting from it, it's like perceived freedom. At least that's my take on it. I think it's a bit of perceived freedom. So yeah.
Freedom, you are. There is a misunderstanding. We can speak about freedom in two different ways. As a feeling, so we in an individualistic way, but that's come later. So freedom of, in this sense, a slave can be free. A Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, was a slave, and he said, "My freedom, I'm free. I'm free because I know, because I'm a philosopher, because I'm not dependent on exterior world." In this sense, each man can be free everywhere, but in political sense, freedom of Athenians was connected with the life of the city, with the life of the people. Was an organic idea of freedom, a common idea of freedom, in contraposition to the barbarians. So,
It's a relative thing.
and this freedom is not only a feeling, but a concrete possibility to realize all human virtualities, all human possibilities. So, if we are member of this big city Athens, we are superior. We can reach levels of humanity more higher, much more higher than other people in this sense.
Is in a way the difference between positive and negative freedom, in a way, as posited by Berlin.
I think that we could good understand the differences between the ancient polis as a community, real community, and the modern metropolis as a society by using the categories of another sociologist, Ferdinand Tönnies, who said that there were two different ways of living in the space, in the social space. The community, Gemeinschaft, that is a warm society with true relations, with organic relations, as in ancient Athens or ancient Sparta. And the other one is the society, in German, Gesellschaft, that is a cold community, a community like the one in the metropolis, with cold relations, with the relations posited by the calculating intellect. Maybe this, the use of these two categories of Tönnies could be a good way to understand and to think the differences between freedom, but especially between the ancient community and the modern, because maybe our two speeches that they were prepared, complementary, but prepared independently, at this point in common, that he spoke about the ancient community and I spoke about the modern society. So this is a possible point of relation.
I also have another question, for your discussion point. So, what is your take on your ideal?
What is your
idea, your opinion?
Yeah,
my opinion
on the ideal state for society? Because you mentioned a lot of things are, like you mentioned the lonely crowd, all these individuals and terms. So, from your observations and studies, I'm sure you have your own personal ideal state of what would it be.
Yes.
Where would you like to see us be?
Yes, my opinion of the future town, that is also the title of a Gramsci work, La città futura, future town, is the negation of this commodification of all relationships, of all relations. I would like to think, when I think to the future, to a town with true relations, more similar to Athens or to Sparta, but I would like to make a precision.
Maybe Sparta.
Yeah, also Sparta, but with a precision,
with a
clarification. The philosopher Max Horkheimer once said that the real democracy is the polis of Athens without slavery, without slaves. I think that maybe this good way of posing the question could be also my answer. Athens without the slaves is my idea of polis.
Thank you.
Any other question? Caroline, wait a second. I'll take you bring you the microphone. And then I think that side.
I want to ask about, just now you were talking to Adi, and you mentioned that an architect looks back into the past so that they can create, say maybe buildings with an idea of what's in the past. But I read an article recently about a biographic designer who mentioned this point where the designers, like maybe we can apply them to architects as well, but designers sometimes nowadays it appears that they are using, say, ideas from the past and stuff like that, but they don't understand. So, what if, say, the architects likewise, when they create buildings, when they design buildings, and they try to imitate buildings of the past, but without like the ideas and without the understanding of the past, wouldn't that just be a bastardization of what's going on? If that's the case, like buildings like that pop up all over the place, wouldn't that be still like a wouldn't everything still be the same all over the place?
Okay, my idea is that every creation, in a certain way, is an imitation of the past. Not only a simple repetition or recreation in the same way, totally identical, but similar, in a similar way. So you can imitate the past, but in the new situation, and with new material, with new technique, new technologies. The history of art is, in a certain way, a history of imitation of the past. New classicism, new Gothic, but these new styles were at the same time imitation of the past, but recreation in a new situation. In this sense, looking backward to the past is a possibility to create something new. But this is a philosophical idea. Both Plato and Aristotle thought the creation, the poiesis creation, not as a creation from the nothing, but as imitation, mimesis. Mimesis of an ideal that's eternal or beyond time. In this way, there is another problem. Modern architecture is not organic with the space, with the topos or place. There is ancient and Renaissance architect thought about genius loci, so the place as a particular genius, a particular inclination to material, to landscape, and so the creation has to have to do with the place. It cannot build the same buildings everywhere in the world. That's a lack of creation in that sense.
So perhaps we could say that instead of looking back into so instead of just imitating a certain portion of the past, so for example, from an Asian country, we look back into our past as our Asian roots because it's more, in a sense, suitable to our location compared to, say, if we look back into the past of the Asian Greeks when we are creating something locally or, say, in China. Would that be the case?
One case can be the building of religious buildings, churches, temples, because the religious experience is necessarily related to a past, to a tradition. So when architects build churches or temples or mosques or synagogue, can create something new, but having in mind what former architects built in order to create a space for a liturgy, for a religious community. In this way, religious tradition can be oasis of against globalization in these deceptive ideas.
So would the so when you abandon your basically, perhaps maybe that's linked to the China portion when you're mentioning they were getting rid of the past, because if you abandon your religious ideas, would that also
so what happened when you abandon your religious
exactly.
ideas? But I was speaking about a civil religion, so a religion which can be a ground for community. So in this sense, even an atheistic government can build a place of reunion or celebration or the Congress, political buildings. I think they imitate churches, temples. You see in Masada, the White House is like a church, So there is a ceremony there, and ceremonies are related to ancient myths, to liturgies, to ceremonies, which are heavy of ideas of the past in stratification we can do. So for you, I think studying history of art, history of architecture will be a very rich occasion and possibility to reuse this idea, these styles. So I am a son of an architect and a sister and a brother architect. So these are ideas I think as philosopher, but in strict connection with the practice of architecture, of modern architecture.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other question?
I would just like to ask about, because I realized that from what you guys have been speaking so far, it seems that you have like a conception of this, it's almost like absolutist and objective conception of the past, and I would like to ask you like, how are you going to clarify that, and the conception of what it means to truly engage in things, because you keep seeming to say that like for example, when you engage through internet, it's not true engagement by value of the fact that you're not within geographical proximity of whoever it is you engage with, but like on what basis do you say that engagement is less real than engagement with a guy in a kopitiam next door? And I can think of so many examples where people have engaged with others genuinely through the internet and have affected people around.
I'll give you a very quick example, very, very briefly, in a negative way. Engaging with someone means that I cannot shut him off when this someone bothers me. On the internet, when someone bothers me, I cancel him from Facebook. Bye-bye. I cannot cancel my neighbor who will keep living near my house. I cannot go there with a bazooka and boom, my neighbor is not there anymore. So I'm forced to engage with him. By virtue of this, I'm forced, Vico would say, maybe, to start reflecting on the kind of things we have in common, to come up with some kind of law that will allow us not to kill each other, not to behave like big beasts. That's the level in which on the internet you don't engage with people, but you see the image of yourself reproduced in infinite mirrors, and as soon as these mirrors do not give you back the image you want to see, boom, you crush the mirror, let's go to the next mirror. That's the main difference, I think, in the dynamics. I've been a bit rushed in interrupting you, but as soon as the idea of looking at it in a negative way came to my mind, I want to grasp it. Does this sort of answer your objection?
Yeah, but I mean, I have another objection to that, because like you could argue equally that you can block out people in the same way, even if it's your neighbor. You could just you could choose to not engage with him. You could just choose to ignore him from make him not a part of your life.
But at that point, you are actively not engaged.
Right, but in the same way, for like people on the internet, let's say if you get into a quarrel with people that you don't particularly agree with, it's still an engagement of sorts because they bother you, and even if you choose to like turn them off completely, how is that different from, let's say, like turning off people who are just because they're geographically proximal? On what basis is the engagement different? You can see people who engage like very genuinely on the internet, and you can see that a lot of people who have affected lives of people across the globe who they are not geographically proximal to at all. So I mean, I don't really see a clear basis for like distinction between the sort of engagement, and like also the thing about like the conception of the past, like it seems a very blurry line. Like where exactly do you draw a line and say, oh, this is the past that I have to conserve? Which past do you conserve? Because conservation is such a very strong issue. Like why do we conserve Bukit Brown as opposed to like something else? Why conserve this particular gem that we like the past is something that the people in the present create, reconstruct. It's not like an absolute thing. So on what basis do you choose to say that this is something we must preserve, and why is there a bias towards having to preserve the past in like a very physical form? Like, because nowadays we do preserve a lot of the past in like forms of writings, texts, or books. Why does it exactly have to be like physical ruins that we have to preserve, for example? That's the questions I pose.
You know, again, about the internet thing. I do think that there is a qualitative difference between deciding not to engage with someone that, you like it or not, is your neighbor and you see him every day. There is an active decision of disengagement there. So you're still engaged by not engaging. Whereas when you cancel someone from your phone or from internet, someone that you won't see again, you won't hear again about. I mean, unless this person really makes the effort to come look for you, that person is gone. So even in the action of not engaging, you are engaging. When you're talking about someone who lives nearby you, the thing is unavoidable. At that point, as I said, either you eliminate the person, or, and that's what happened, I think, in the beginning of society, and Vico is right, you must say, okay, let's think how and why we, after all, have more things in common than not in common. And that's when society is born. And I agree with him when he says that internet severs, in a way, societal bonds on the one hand. Very quickly on the past, I won't use the category of conservation. And that was my critique about the touristification of the past. Why is it beautiful to go to Palazzo Vecchio in Florence? Not so much because Palazzo Vecchio has beautiful frescoes, which it does, but the most moving thing about Palazzo Vecchio is that Renzi's ugly face, the former mayor of Florence, exercised his power as mayor in Palazzo Vecchio. That is to say, that building of the past, where Lorenzo Magnifico has lived, where Leonardo has painted, where Michelangelo passed his days, where the Florentines have conjured up against the Medici and then have been hanged by the Medici.
Do they know that he's our prime minister or not?
Ah, no, probably they don't. they will. That very palace is still alive. It's not a piece of museum. You live in it. So it's not conservation, but it's engagement again with the past. The very same way, in a certain manner, in which you engage with a living person. So it's not that you choose to preserve a piece of the past. If you destroy Palazzo Vecchio, you are choosing to destroy Palazzo Vecchio. Whereas we're not choosing to preserve Palazzo Vecchio. Palazzo Vecchio is there. If we destroy it, we are consciously deciding to cut a certain route that is there and that is still alive. I don't know if this makes the thing clear.
Just let me add to that.
Maybe the microphone will be Casey.
Yeah, Tanjunchi, yeah? Yeah. What you were just saying, I think it can be tied to Diego's talk earlier when he was talking about the present is open to other possibilities. And I think if you have something that's not from the immediate present that is still existing, I think it aids the imagination in thinking about possibilities other than what is immediately present. So I think that the preservation is important for the imagination, to imagine that and to understand that things were once other than what they are now, and to see that in a visceral way. So I think that's one reason why this sort of preservation is important, because it's really, I think it's important for the future to imagine other possibilities. Also, the comment about architecture and borrowing foreign forms, I think, in my opinion, it's perfectly fine to borrow the foreign forms. It's been done countless times, and often the foreign forms then become, in some ways, indigenized. If you just look at architecture for the last 100 years in Asia, you go down to Chinatown. I mean, the shops in Chinatown are, you could say, borrowed Western forms of shop houses, but they were like borrowed Western forms, borrowed Western materials even that became indigenized. And now they're really part of the Singaporean landscape.
The question is because, like, if you mention about how all the cities are somewhat looking the same and are becoming like the same, if you all go from the same source, then wouldn't that kind of perpetuate that sameness throughout the cities? Like, for example, if I go to different Chinatowns, I'll still look at the same Chinatown.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But I'm saying you don't have to all borrow the exact. Not every place has to borrow the exact same form. I mean, there are many forms to choose from. I mean, that thing that you're talking about over there at Buena Vista, that's just like the latest form. You can borrow forms from the past. You know, in the 19th century, and there was a period in which Egyptian forms were borrowed in the United States. I mean, how far away is the United States from Egypt, both in terms of time and space? But those forms were borrowed and used in architecture, and then it took an American twist on it. So I think it's perfectly fine to borrow. Not everyone has to borrow the same form everywhere at the same time. You know, there are lots. The past offers lots of different forms.
Yeah, we want to add something.
Yes, I would like just to make two more reflections about Facebook, because you told about Facebook before. Two considerations. The first one is this. Facebook, in my opinion, doesn't
doesn't
doesn't double the sociality, the real society. It creates a new form of society, a new kind of sociality also, first. Second question is the following one, and it's an answer that I make always to my students in Milan. Which kind of dictatorship in the past could put on record all these people, this population? No one. There was always the dissident, the revolutionary. With Facebook, we put on record ourselves by our decision.
Yeah.
So we give a lot of information of us to the power, to Google, to the. So it's a particular form of the power, of the permissive power, anarchical power anarchical power in our society that let us be free, but it controls us, rules us. This is another question that, starting from Zimmer, maybe we can clarify that the objective power seems to be permissive, anarchical, but it rules.
Controls.
The modern metropolis, cosmopolitan metropolis.
Tony, I think you tried several times to grasp it.
Okay. I mean, I have many questions, which probably would go for several hours. So I'm maybe have some comments, and you might want to respond to this. I mean, I think your reading of Simmel with the conclusion of the Metropolis as a kind of universal commodification is, from my point of view, a little too narrow, because it's too much, I think, in some way, almost a confusion of cause and effect. I don't think that the metropolis is the place, is kind of causing this kind of commodification in this sense, but is more the place where these general tendencies get maybe in some way most visible, which I think has to do with the general thing that I think the city is not so much about this commodification, but in general I think it's about exchange, which is a little bit a larger notion, because it's not only about the exchange of commodities, but I think it's in general exchange of it can be interactions, informations, different type of things that in some way are kind of typical for a city, or I'm an architect, and I think the way we think today about cities or metropolis in this larger sense, in some way, is a densification of different possibilities that are basically city marks as space. So we have cities, or the whole. Yes, you mentioned it, urbanization and globalization in some way kind of going hand in hand. This has in some way to do, I think, with the fact that we today look at cities or the whole world in some way as more like a network. In some way, and it's not a specific location, but in some way, globalization is a kind of urban tissue with varying densities, and these densities in some way are kind of marked by these interaction of different. If you call it with Luhmann, these different kind of societies that in some way start to be close together and interact, and that marks a city, and that is kind of a different type of exchanges or flows in some way happen. So I think that's for me something that probably gives a little bit different take on the reading of Simmel, because something I think that runs through the whole discussion in the evening is, to me, a little bit too much a reading of proximity or of the notion of neighborhood that is too much kind of read or identified with a physical kind of closeness, where I think the notion of neighborhood has to be seen in this more abstract sense, where, if you call it now with Luhmann, different kind of societies are in some way close, but they don't necessarily have to be physically close, but they are defined through different kind of measures or metrics. Yeah? So this old metric, or the initial metric of almost the limit that is very close to space, or in Heidegger this room as kind of clearly marked out boundary that marks kind of space and my being in the world, I think we have to read this today a little bit different. And so it's not really a question, I think it's just general comments which I think I could start to give a little different direction.
Yeah, very well. It's very a good reflection, this one, especially with the difference between commodification and exchange. A little parenthesis. Luhmann was professor in Bielefeld.
Okay.
He was speaking before about Bielefeld. Yes, I think it's so that in the big city life, the real relation is the one of exchange, not only commodification maybe, but we must seriously answer, are there in the big city life a relation and exchange that are not based or mediated by the commodity form? This is the question. I think that it would be very difficult to find several relations or exchanges in the big metropolis life not founded on the commodity form. Very hard.
I mean, yes, I agree, but I think for me, how I read it is, I think we have, a general tendency since probably the 1980s of, I would call it economization of all our aspects of life, which are related to this question of quantification and measurement in a very simplistic way almost. And I think that is a much more the driving force that, coupled with this kind of digitalization we see at the same time, has kind of produced an enormous force that in some way starts now to run through all lives and all levels of society. Where, I mean, for example, we can look at commodities, but also universities. I mean, when I studied, that's not so long ago, there was no module, there was no kind of exam, there was no kind of constant measure of qualities. You came to the university, you had maybe one course that was fixed and the rest was kind of figure it out yourself, go to the library, study, discuss, talk. So it was a kind of very kind of learning through diving into the, call it, world of knowledge and try to make sense out of it through interaction. Engagement. Yeah. I had, I think 2 exams. One in between, kind of a bachelor, which was 30 minutes discussion with my prof, and a master exam, which was basically also 45 minutes discussion with my prof. That was all. I would never survive in a university like this, where you have every week kind of something to turn in, to be graded, every semester a bunch of exams. I would not get through this.
Me too, I would commit suicide after 2 days.
But this is in some way a fact. I mean, in Europe we have this with the Bologna process, basically this kind of modularization of knowledge, making quantifiable, exchangeable, kind of. That's for me a very good example of this kind of, all this kind of quantification, economization of all levels of
debt and credits in the school, commodification.
Yes, yeah. And so that's for me in some way the driving force behind all these things, where we, I think, have to question in some way also where then all these questions that you brought up with interaction, society, how do we work against it or with it, because in some way these are still things that are maybe not quantifiable, at least it's my hope. And just this like or dislike is for me not a kind of measure of real interaction.
Yeah.
And so I think these are just kind of some comments in some way to maybe to make this whole a bit broader. Maybe just adding to your, just as a parenthesis, one hand I can see why that cities get similar, but I totally disagree that going through this city, it's very particular and it's very much reflecting the politics that is running here. Singapore, even though it looks maybe on the first very, very globalized and unspecific, this city and pretty much every city is still very, very, very specific. So just having, let's say, McDonald's and all this stuff everywhere doesn't make kind of it all the same. So we could, to describe this why, and so we could go on for several hours, but
I agree with you that there are, of course, nuances that do characterize each metropolis, right? I was basing my comment mostly on, as I said, a first-hand experience. Let's say very, very simply. I remember when I was living in Los Angeles or in Miami, to go get a beer with a friend was an enterprise. It wasn't so easy. You had to plan it very carefully because it took 1 hour to get to your place, to the other place, if you were lucky. Same thing here in Singapore. For me to go even just to the MRT here is 10 minutes walk, sometimes under inclement sun, sometimes under the rain, sometimes I'm just pissed off because I'm tired and I still have to walk 10 minutes and then it's still 20 minutes to go to find Mike, and then from the MRT 15 minutes to Mike's house. And by the end of the process, you're like, Mike, do you really want a glass of wine? Why don't we go to bed? And that's it, right? So what really I find very similar is the way in which, in a way, human freedom, to go back to Karen's question regarding freedom, is sort of channeled. It's sort of channeled. And yes, I agree with you that then when you pay attention, you do see differences that are due to each particular place. But still, overall, the quality of your overall experience is pretty, at least for me, is pretty much the same. That is to say, you're always channeled and driven and contained, in a way, contained. So that's something that I really started reflecting about. How come that this design of the city, this urban design, keeps being repeated? Yeah, but I agree with you that, of course, Singapore is a very particular case, like Los Angeles is a very particular case. Any other question?
I just want to make a comment. Like, how, because as in, you mentioned that in a metropolis there's this sort of containment, right? So for those people who are aware of this containment, I think they feel very disengaged with the society. They feel very disengaged with all of the things that they are supposed to be part of. And what then can we make of these individuals, and how can we? Actually, it's not really a question. I'm just sort of making a comment, and I just want to speak my mind. So, because there are individuals in SUTD, for example, who feel very disengaged with the university, and they've always felt disengaged with the society because it doesn't address, because they have realized that it contains them and it doesn't address bigger concerns. And this is not reflective only of, and this is reflective, like, how I can put it is that, like, the university is a microcosm of the state as a whole, of the city as a whole. And so the fact that the university sort of makes you feel contained is also a reflection that the state is making you feel contained. And how, I'm just wondering, how do we, like, and you mentioned, I remember you mentioned that we have to look at past possibilities and try and learn from the past, and because the past contains beauty and we have to sort of create that beauty in our present. But what if you feel disengaged with the past as well? Then what is there left for you?
Then you'll be fucked. What if you feel disengaged even from the past? What do you do then?
I don't understand the answer.
The question.
The question. In which way
if you are even disengaged from the past, right? If you don't feel any interest in the past, what do you do then?
I think that if you don't feel this engagement with the past, perhaps you don't know the past. So in a certain way, I feel a sympathy, a concordance between our soul and the exterior beauty. So I think, I'm sure that many production of the past, those we denote as classic, are full of values of beauty, of good in general sense, good possibilities, good experience, possibility to increase humanity, to develop humanity in all possible senses. But in this sense, not only buildings, I mean poetry, literature, religious tradition, theater, art, and we can go farther, cinema. So, what in general sense we think as spiritual products. When we talk about humanism in Italian sense means something which can produce man, person, not things. So this way to approach the past, the spiritual, the cultural, the philosophical, the product of arts, is a way to make human beings to become ourselves human or more human in this sense.
Well,
can you describe a little bit more? I'm just interested now. In which sense do you feel yourself constrained through the university and disengaged from don't know, their past or whatever? I would just.
Okay, I can speak a little bit about that. But, so I've always felt this way, I've always felt this way. I've always felt disengaged from the society that I'm in. I've never felt part of it. Maybe it's a phenomenon that's particular only to me. I don't know. So there are things which I enjoy, but I cannot pursue.
But I mean, is this specific to Singapore, or it involves basically whole humankind?
I think perhaps whole humankind.
Okay, then you are really screwed.
Well, you know, just as a way of brief comment, and then if there are no more questions, maybe we conclude here. I would say that what Tony said in the beginning, you know, talking about this kind of university, which is not unique. I mean, in the States, you have pretty much the same kind of university now. They're proposing it in Europe too, the Bologna, whatever it's called, the modules and blah, 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 blah. Tony said that he wouldn't have survived in this kind of university. I know for a fact that they would have committed suicide after 2 weeks at most. Maybe a way to get out of this disengagement, maybe, I don't know, the disengagement, at least for me, I feel disengaged when I feel, again, channeled. When I feel that no matter what I do, I've already been channeled. At that point, I'm like, okay, you know what the fuck, like, I'll just go with this, go to hell, you everybody, and I just care about myself. So maybe a way could be to get out of that kind of mania about calculating, modulating, this kind of Le Corbusier model applied then to society, right? We had a discussion yesterday with Diego and Giuseppe that we put, we have taped. I know that on this Diego wouldn't agree with me. Maybe a possibility to get out of this could be Heidegger's Gelassenheit, in the sense of, you know, finally giving up with the mania of calculating and manipulating things. But that's really a topic for another discussion, and maybe next year we'll invite them again and we'll have that kind of discussion. All right, thank you everybody for being here.
Everybody.